John B. Baldwin, an Augusta County delegate to the Virginia Secessionist Convention in March of 1861, said, "I say then that viewed from the standpoint, there is but one single subject of complaint which Virginia has to make against the government under which we live, a complaint made by the whole South, and that is on the subject of African slavery." Baldwin again later said, "But, sir, the great cause of complaint now is the slavery question, and the question is growing out of it. If there is any other cause of complaint which has been influential in any quarter to bring about the crisis which is now upon us, if any state or any people have made the troubles growing out of this question a pretext for agitation instead of a cause for honest complaint, Virginia can have no sympathy whatever in any such feeling, any such policy, in any such attempt. It is the slavery question. Is it not so?" Those quotes are taken from the Journal of the Virginia Secession Convention, Volume 2, and they're located on page 193 and 140 if you're interested in citing my facts. The American Civil War was about slavery. I'm just going to put it out there, just flat and blankly. The American Civil War was fought over slavery. You can disagree if you want, but you're wrong. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be starting a new series of Ultimate General Civil War. Fittingly, I'm playing from the Union side, and I'm going to play a campaign through as far as I can, given this game is in early access and not all of the battles are out yet. I've played through the Union once, but lost very rapidly. I played through as the Confederacy and got as far as you could at the time, but my Union campaign was cut short by incompetence on my own part. So this is the first part of a new series that is going to be looking at the history of the American Civil War. And I had been intending to do this for a while. The gameplay is actually from maybe a week or two ago when I did a live stream late at night. And the reason I decided to start the series now, I'm working on a Scourge of War series where I'm playing the Battle of Antietam in real time. But I'm also going to be doing the Ultimate General series. And the reason that I'm doing this video today is because over the last few days, I've seen quite a few comments on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube feed, through comments on some of my other videos about how, oh, I wish the South had won. The South wasn't really fighting for slavery. It was just a minor part in the Confederacy. The war wasn't really fought over slavery. It was fought over states' rights. All the sort of typical arguments that people make when it comes to the lost cause theories behind the American Civil War. And I wanted to address that. I know I'm going to get some dislikes. I'm probably going to get some unsubs and some unfriendly comments in the threads below. I certainly understand that. And I try to avoid directly touching on modern-day politics in most of my videos. Everybody's got their own opinions. At least in the United States, we live in a country where traditionally, although we're certainly going through a rough patch, but traditionally, you can kind of support one side or the other, and people generally still get along. We're going through our own issues at the moment, but I tend to avoid that. I'm not someone who wears my specific party leanings on my sleeve. I certainly don't tend to wear my, who I voted for on my sleeves. I've voted for candidates in both parties at times. But that's neither here nor there. This really isn't a discussion about politics as much as you may feel it is. This is a discussion about history. And it's important history, right? Because over 600,000 Americans died in the American Civil War. And while there is gameplay going on in the back, this video may read more as straight talk. Me just kind of talking to you about the Civil War and trying to explain. I've done this once before, but trying to explain maybe with some more facts and some more reasons why the Civil War was about slavery. Now, before I go any further, I will call out I am not an expert. I am not a historian. I am not someone who is extremely qualified to talk about slavery. What I am is someone who's read a fair amount of history about the Civil War and who appreciates the importance of primary sources and when they are produced. This is going to have a lot of quotes. I'm not providing a ton of context with these quotes. I admit that. My purpose is more to demonstrate to you who are less likely to believe, to those of you who are less likely to believe that the war was really about slavery, How do you address these statements made by Southern figures? If you want a more in-depth look at the Civil War, why it was fought, I recommend The Battle Cry of Freedom by McPherson. I'll put that in the link below. There are many great histories that all talk about the war and its origins. McPherson does a pretty good job of talking about that and the war as a whole. Probably the best single-volume look at it. But the vast and overwhelming preponderance of scholarship today admits the war was about slavery. Whether you like it or not, that's what scholars today are saying. Scholars who are less biased, typically, and who have less of an agenda than some of the historians that were writing right after the war, which pushed the lost cause and states' rights agenda. So let's get that out there right now, that the war was, in my opinion, not even my opinion, in almost every expert's opinion, not even my own, that the war was about slavery. And, I'm just going to provide some quotes. And if you want more context, more expertise, more rationale, please do some digging on your own. But at the very least, if you're going to argue it wasn't about slavery, I expect some sort of retort from the following quotes that will come later in this video. And I don't think there's any way you can get around it. I know why some people want to justify the South, why people don't want the war to be about slavery. It's an amazingly fascinating period in American history. I believe more has been written about the American Civil War than pretty much any other topic in American history. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's certainly up there. New periodicals on the Civil War are published almost every single day, if not every single day. And it's a conflict which ended just a little over 150 years ago. It's a seminal moment in our nation's history, and it is divisive to this day. You still have many in the country believing that the war was fought for one thing, while many in the country believe it was fought for another. You still have many streets named after famous Confederate generals, despite the fact that in all honesty, the generals were traitors to the Union. Now, I've seen the argument that, well, if the South had won, they'd be patriots to a new country, and you may be right. But I think the fundamental reason for this disconnect, there's some revisionist history certainly that went on after the war, but I kind of look at it in terms of what people make the argument with some German generals in World War II. But I'm not directly comparing Nazi Germany and the Confederacy. That's not my intent. My point is that people sort of revere some of the German generals without intending to revere Nazi Germany. So some people really revere Erwin Rommel, for example. Many to this day, especially in many Western countries, consider him, a fantastic general, not an all-around terrible guy. He generally kind of viewed as one of the good guys in Nazi Germany. And people generally don't vilify the ordinary German trooper in the Wehrmacht. The SS is a little bit different, obviously, but with regards to the Wehrmacht, people generally don't say every single Wehrmacht soldier was evil. They were all fighting for the conquest of Europe. They were all fighting for Nazism. They were fighting to exterminate the Jews. People generally don't associate most German soldiers in World War II with that, nor do they associate Erwin Rommel with that. I think part of that is because so many of us in the United States have German blood in our veins, and we feel, German heritage and whatnot. We don't want to feel like there's something intrinsically wrong with being German and being tied to Nazism. I also think part of it's just from a natural fascination with history. A lot of people are really interested in World War II history. The German Reich accomplished phenomenal military accomplishments under this evil regime of Nazi Germany, and people kind of want to justify their fascination with this regime without feeling dirty, and that's understandable. You've got a passion and an interest in a subject, and you don't want to, be a weirdo who's, fascinated and impressed and, reveres some of the accomplishments that the German military made while it was, serving under the regime of one of the most evil dictatorships of all time. And I think the American Civil War shares some parallels. So before I get into the history, I'm just going to explain my point here. The American Civil War comes at this sort of pre-modern but nearly modern time in American history where America is really becoming a global power. America is industrializing. and the era of the hero is slowly fading into the past. But the American Civil War, more than any other war in history, was filled with daring, dashing military commanders, heroic efforts by soldiers on both sides that people want to remember and want to remember positively. You know, the efforts of the Confederacy against an overwhelming Union force, the sheer brilliance of commanders like Jackson and Lee, and maybe to a lesser extent Longstreet. This glorious era, as is portrayed in American history, is something that people want to remember in a positive light. Not necessarily, all the deaths. Obviously, that's not good. But in terms of hundreds of thousands of people made a sacrifice for a cause, the South was very much the underdog story of, holding out against overwhelming odds. Something that we read about in books all the time, right? The Lord of the Rings, the good guys are holding off against an evil horde. Or pretty much any other book, the good guys tend to be the underdogs. And people want to root for the underdogs. And if you're someone who grew up in the South and you've been, fed this story of heroism in the face of overwhelming odds, the Greeks are full of these stories, the 300, for example. You don't want to think back on your predecessors, on your state, on your heroes that you were kind of taught about growing up, that they were evil people. You want to believe that the sacrifice meant something, that it was for something, some sort of worthy cause, something worth defending. And I think that's where this mantra of states' rights comes in. As we'll go through in a few moments, the Civil War was about slavery. There's no getting around that. The principal issue was slavery. You may hear people say, well, no, it was really states' rights, and slavery was only a piece of that. Slavery was the states' right that the South was fighting over. There were other issues, sure. But at the end of it, if you boil everything down, and you come down to say, what was the Civil War about? The principal issue, by far, and it's not even close, is slavery. And I'm going to try and prove that to you, if I haven't lost half my audience already, now that we're 8 minutes in the next few minutes. The reason people don't want to admit that, one, they've been taught that their whole lives. They've been fed a alternative history, a sort of fake history, a revisionist history. And it's hard to break through that, right? I mean, if you've been taught your whole life that Robert E. Lee was this noble, chivalrous figure and was this great general, do you really want to believe he was fighting for an evil cause? There's no doubt he was. He was fighting for an evil cause. The Confederacy was fighting for an evil cause. But you don't want to believe that 300,000 plus of your own, Southern brethren died for nothing. You don't want to believe they fought for a invalid cause, for an unjust cause. And so you believe that states' rights is worth all of this. And maybe it is. States' rights as a principle sounds nice, and it's why people rush to it. It's this idea of, this sounds like a great and noble issue. And I still personally believe that states' rights are important in today's America. States' rights are a valid concern, a valid item that should be fought for and should be defended, not in a Civil War type sense, but in terms of political sense. States' rights are an issue that politically should be defended. However, that's not what the Civil War was over. You can't say states' rights is what the war was about when the only issue, the only states' rights that the states continuously and overwhelmingly addressed every single time it came up was the issue of slavery. It was the states' right in question. So it seems a little bit disingenuous to turn around and say, well, because you can argue that slavery was a states' right, that the war was really about states' rights. It's slavery in a more palatable and a more sellable veneer. And let's discuss that. Let's jump back in. Because again, no one wants to think they're heroes. The people they've grown up admiring were fighting for a bad cause. It's the same reason people make the argument that Rommel, is somewhat innocent in terms of Nazi Germany, that he didn't really know what was going on. He was such a chivalrous gentleman and, ignoring his close ties to the Nazi party all the way up almost until he turned on it. But nonetheless, I mean, it's possible to say that some of these figures may not have been 100% evil. I'm not saying Robert E. Lee was the demon, you know. I'm not saying that James Longstreet was a demon, but he was fighting, and they were fighting for evil causes. Good men sometimes fight for evil causes. I'm not here to say whether Lee or Longstreet or Jackson were good men. I'm not here to say that they were bad men. I'm here to say that the cause they were fighting for was corrupt, it was unjust, it was inhumane. It was slavery. They may have had their own motivations, as many soldiers did, for fighting. Their direct motivations may have been more pure, more just. They may not have been fighting personally for slavery, but the state they were fighting for was built on the foundation of slavery. And I think that's enough of me rambling. So let's kind of get into the points that I want to talk about. Let's talk about why I believe this. Let's talk about why the facts almost unanimously back me up. And why, if you refuse to believe this, I'm not going to say that's fine. It's certainly your choice to disbelieve this. But you're wrong. Because the Civil War was about slavery. The Vice President of the Confederate States, Alexander Stephens, said, when referencing the Confederate government, "Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the greatest truth, that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery is his natural and normal condition." Howell Cobb, former general in Lee's army and prominent pre-war Georgian politician, said, "If slaves will make good soldiers, then our whole theory of slavery is wrong." Robert M.T. Hunter, a senator from Virginia, said, "What did we go to war for if not to protect our property?" And the property that the Southern figures almost always refer to, in all of their quotes, is slavery. You may disagree with some of my quotes. Obviously I'm quoting individuals. I'm not quoting necessarily law that comes back to say that the Civil War was about slavery. But if you don't believe me, why don't we take a look at the documents, the Southern documents about the war. The Confederate Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 4. "No bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed." Okay, I mean, the American Constitution supported slavery initially, right? Probably the only mention of it. No? No, you're wrong. Article 4, Section 3, Paragraph 3, "The Confederate States may acquire new territory. In all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery, as it now exists in the Confederate States, shall be recognized and protected by Congress and the territorial government." Okay. Well, I mean, what did the states really say about it? I mean, that's the Constitution, right? Well, the Georgia Constitution of 1861, "The General Assembly shall have no power to pass laws for the emancipation of slaves." Okay. The Alabama State Constitution of 1861, "No slave in this state shall be emancipated by any act done to take effect in this state, or any other." Sensing a trend here, right? I mean, we're certainly seeing that slavery was important to the government, as they're putting it in their constitutions as essentially a preeminent right in their secessionist rationale. Delegates on the floor of the South are making the argument for slavery, saying that that's the entire point of the war. Lawrence Kite, a congressman from South Carolina, in a speech to the House in January of 1860, after the secession of South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia had already occurred, said this on the floor of the House: "African slavery is the cornerstone of the industrial, social, and political fabric of the South, and whatever wars against it, wars against her very existence. Strike down the institution of African slavery, and you reduce the South to depopulation and barbarism." Kite also said the following in a South Carolina secession convention when they were talking about the causes of the war, and I quote, "Our people have come to this on the question of slavery. I am willing, in that address, to rest it upon that question. I think it is the great central point from which we are now proceeding, and I am not willing to divert the public attention from it." That was from the Charleston, South Carolina Courier, dated December 22nd, 1860. So, I mean, how many quotes do we really need? What kind of evidence do we need to suggest that the South seceded over slavery? I'm not sure I mean, I get it. People have grown up their whole lives being told it was over states' rights. But saying that the right in question was almost exclusively slavery, or tariffs over slavery, or taxation of slavery, or expansion of slavery, at the end of the day, these rights in question are all coming from the point of view of slavery. Almost all, anyway. Maybe there's a small, you can quote me something. So, how do we reconcile this? What can we not admit that the war was about slavery, admit that the South's cause was invalid, unjust, and still come to the conclusion that it's worth studying? That Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson are still phenomenally interesting military figures to study, that the South put up a impressive struggle against very strong odds against it, that hundreds of thousands of people died for a invalid cause, but they still fought in a conflict against their brothers. I don't really think it detracts anything unless you're trying to glorify the South, unless you're trying to say, man, that South, the South should have won. It would have been great. Unless that's your point, I don't see how admitting that the war was about slavery hurts you. Personally, anyway. I mean, we talk a lot about history in World War II. No one doesn't study the Eastern Theater or talk about Nazi Germany or talk about the Soviet Union because they were evil regimes. They were. And again, I'm not trying to compare regimes, but I think it's safe to say a state that was holding slaves is not a state we should model, not a state we should call just. In that way, our early days as a country were unjust. There were reasons for it, but we weren't a just nation. We weren't a free nation. But we improved with time. And to make some sort of claim that the South was this ideal that we should hold up and that slavery was just a piece of it, just a small piece, we can ignore that, right? We can say what a great idea this country was founded upon, but we can't do that when that idea was slavery. The South Carolina Declaration of Secession talks about slavery some 19 times. I looked through it today, actually. It references slavery. I believe it was 19 times. Let me double check. 18 times, I'm sorry. Talking about the slave-holding states and various other quotes. Almost every single every single Declaration of Secession by all the Southern states talk about slavery. The Mississippi Declaration of Secession. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. Okay. The Texas Declaration. In all non-slave-holding states, in violation of that good faith and committee, which should exist between entirely distinct nations, the people have formed themselves into great sectional party, now strong enough in numbers to control the affairs of each state of those states, based upon unnatural feeling of hostility toward those southern states and their beneficent and patriarchal system of African slavery. So there, at least, Texas is referencing to some offhand mentioned states' rights. But again, it's within the context of slavery. The Declaration goes on to talk more about divine law, the abolition of Negro slavery, and other causes for the war, specifically slavery. Okay, so, yeah. The South seceded over slavery. Can we admit that now? Please, guys? Please? I mean, come on. This is just so frustrating. We continue to promote a lie so that we can feel good about being fascinated and in love with a part of our country's history. That's the way it seems to me. You feel bad promoting and saying how great the South was if you admit it was founded on what today is a lie. I get it. But let's not blind ourselves to that fact. Let's not hold the South up as some ideal confederacy that the United States should more closely resemble in an attempt to decentralize. You can make the argument today that states' rights are important, You can make the argument that states should have more states' rights. I would disagree with the rights of secession. I don't believe that is a right. I don't think that should occur. But at the end of the day, the South fought for slavery. Whether you like it or not, you're wrong. And you can leave comments where you disagree, but I can come up with dozens more quotes from men made at the time of the war that the South was about slavery. You know, when people talk about states' rights and, you know, the effort to fight against an unjust cause by the North and that the North was the aggressor, they forget the fact that almost all of those quotes, you can give me quotes about how the South wasn't fighting for slavery, but I would be willing to bet almost every one of those quotes is going to come after the Civil War ended. I'm sorry, but that's someone trying to protect their legacy. That's not in any way fact. It's not. This is from the diary of a Union soldier in the 28th Infantry. After he had captured some Confederates, he said, "Last night I talked a while to those men who came in the day before yesterday from the southwest part of the state, almost 120 miles distant. Many of them wished slavery abolished and slaves out of the country, as they said it was the cause of the war, and the curse of our country, and the foe of the body of the people, the poor whites. They knew the slave masters got up the war expressly in the interests of the institution, and with no real cause from the government or the North." So there, even in one of your scenarios where you want to say, okay, the Southern troops weren't fighting for slavery, I'm not disagreeing with you. Many of the poor white soldiers probably didn't give a damn about slavery. But that's not why the war started. That's not what they were fighting for. They personally may not have been fighting for slavery. I'm not arguing the average Southern soldier was fighting for slavery. That's not my point. My point is that the country was founded on it. It was steeped in it. The reason for the secession was it. I have a tendency in my videos to be long-winded, to keep repeating myself. But this is just one of those things that really irks me, really bothers me. It's an example of clear, incontrovertible fact being replaced by fiction. Being replaced by a group of people after the war who wanted to protect their legacy and said, damn it, we lost, but wasn't a great effort. We've got to justify these hundreds of thousands of deaths. We've got to justify our actions. We've got to make ourselves feel better about the effort. We need to be noble. We need to be those knights on that shining hill. What can we do? Let's not make the war about slavery. That sure as hell is the wrong way to end up in the history books. Fighting on the side of slavery after it's lost. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to turn this into a tangent. Well, I kind of did. But I didn't mean to ramble about the same 5 words every minute. If you're still with me, I appreciate you sticking with me. If you feel the war really isn't about slavery, be polite, but feel free to comment below. Know that I disagree with you. You'll have to bring substantial evidence to the contrary to change my view. I probably won't change your view. If you've grown up thinking this for 30 plus years, you're probably steeped in it. And that's really a shame. You know, I'm just going to end it there. I'm going to put some links to some of the sources that I had in here. There was a great resource which I used quite extensively from civilwarcauses.org. Has select quotes from 1830 to 1865. They are all cited. I did back check them. They are properly cited. You can look up almost all of the resources yourself if you want to question the sources. I did for some of them. And quoted a few other pieces as well. I actually pulled up the actual transcript of the Confederate Articles of Confederation or the Articles of Secession for South Carolina. Not thrilled about using Huffington Post for some of the quotes, but I did use that for one of the quotes that I mentioned. I realize that site tends to have a left-leaning bias. There's certainly no getting around that. But again, I did back-check the quotes that were provided, and they're valid. Yeah, I mean, hopefully this got to someone. Hopefully you listened to this and you realized, listen, I haven't heard those quotes before. That's not something I thought about. And if you do try and prove me wrong, and you try and comment, please, 1, cite your source. 2, if it's a source that was provided after the war, if the quote came from after the war, it's not a valid quote. That's not to say that historians or biographies that were made after the war are completely invalid in their historical source. But what you need to consider is the fact that the individual who's saying that is saying that in a point of reflection. It's like asking a biographer about the individual they did the biography on, and you say the only thing that you asked him about, the only sources you relied on was that individual's quotes, looking in his career in retrospect and trying to protect his legacy. Could you imagine if someone went to, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of a figure. Well, let's look at the Nuremberg trials. And again, I hate coming back to Nazi Germany, but it's such an easy example. Look at all of the Nazi figures who were being tried at Nuremberg. There was a lot of good history that came out of it. I just finished reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Scheer. And he uses a lot of those sources, but he doesn't rely exclusively on them. And he constantly talks about, this guy's saying this, but if you look at real-time sources in the war, it says this, and he's obviously just trying to make himself look good. You're under trial. Are you really going to tell the full truth? You may have sworn that oath, but if you're trying to protect yourself from being tied in with, the gas chambers at Auschwitz, you're probably going to come up with some other reason why, you were doing what you were doing. Oh, you were just ordered to. You weren't really in the room. You didn't really know what was going on. You just, you're not going to say flat out, yep, I knew what I was doing. Some people might. Most people probably won't. And so if you're a Southern general being interviewed for a history book after the war, or, as in many cases, if you're writing history, you've got to justify why you just did what the hell you did. And saying it was to continue to oppress a now free people, although their true freedom wouldn't come till later. I mean, come on. Let's be real, guys. This is bullshit. You should know that. Deep down in your heart, I hope you, if you're not willing to admit it, I hope you at least know deep down in your heart that it's bullshit. Anyway, guys, that's enough of me preaching. I haven't done something like this maybe ever. Hopefully I don't lose all my subscribers. I think by this time I may have hit 10,000, but we'll see if I dip below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. That's all. This was the first part of my new series. I'm not going to be doing a whole bunch of these kind of monologues where I just preach. I'm going to be talking more about the military history of the Civil War from here on out, so hopefully you can enjoy that. I encourage conversation below, but if anyone gets untoward, rude, racist, anything like that, I will delete your posts. It's my channel, guys. I can do that. Anyway, I hope you guys all enjoyed. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.